Hey you guys, it's Peter and welcome to my channel, Peter Watches TV, where I watch all the TV shows, especially true crime, and I try to watch all the newest true crime documentaries as soon as they come out and come over here and talk about them. And today I want to talk about Netflix's newest true crime documentary that literally was just released today, and that is Eileen, Queen of the Serial Killers. I started watching this last night. It was released at 3 o'clock in the morning last night, and I think at about 3:10, I was sitting there with my cup of coffee, and I was sat ready to watch this documentary. Eileen Warnos is somebody that I have been greatly intrigued with much of my life. And I probably need to give a little background story to, I don't know if I would call it an obsession, but an interest in Eileen Warnos through the years. I have watched all the documentaries, I've watched all the movies, I've read the books. I know so much about Eileen Warnos. And if you've watched this channel and my other channels as well, I have a great interest in true crime. I think in reading and watching true crime, it's very, very important that there is a honoring of the victims. And I think that that's really important, especially in today's time, in honoring the victims and the telling of any kind of story to do with true crime and not glamorizing the killer or any of that kind of stuff. And I think that that needs to be spoken about when we talk about true crime. That being said, I've always had very specific feelings about Eileen Warnos as somewhat of a victim of our society. And I've said this in many, many videos. I've said that I've talked a lot about her in videos, and I have said that I felt like she was a victim of our society, that I didn't condone her choices. I didn't condone her horrific, violent behavior of killing these men whatsoever. I didn't condone it, but I understood it in a way that with many serial killers, I didn't understand. And I think to some degree, that was why Eileen Warnos had such a difficult time identifying herself as a serial killer. So background history, I got interested in her years and years and years ago, long before, I think it's Nick Bloomfield, his documentaries, The Selling of a Serial Killer and The Life and Death of a Serial Killer came out. So I've seen those documentaries, I don't even know how many times, countless times, probably 10 to 20 times each. And have read the books about Eileen Warnos, have seen the Gene Smart made-for-TV movie that they actually reference in this documentary. And so, to be honest with you, when I know a lot about a case, there's only a few cases that I am this intrigued with. The Herb Baumeister Fox Hollow Farms case, I'm extremely interested in. The killings were happening during the time that I was young, and it was the age of the victims in Indianapolis, where Herb Baumeister is from. I've covered that extensively over on my Peter Mon channel. I just did an update last week, and I've covered the documentary Playground of a Serial Killer over here. I'm also greatly interested in the Delphi case, because the Delphi case takes place in Indiana, or took place in Indiana as well. But the Eileen Warnos case is interesting to me. I'm not really sure. Usually there's something relatable about the case to me for me to get that intrigued by it. For example, I mean, Fox Hollow Farms and Herb Baumeister, he was targeting gay men in Indianapolis at the time that I was going out to the bars that he was picking guys up from. He lived very close to where I grew up. So there was a lot of, like, for me, I could relate and almost kind of see myself as in the victim's eyes kind of thing. With Delphi is like literally like an hour and a half from my front porch. And so when the Delphi case happened, so many people in Indiana were talking about it. So many people were speculating about the case. With Eileen Warnos, I'm not really sure what is relatable about her story. And I didn't even know her full story until, I mean, the documentaries, the Nick Bloomfield ones, came out years apart. So I didn't even know. The second one, it gets really into the childhood of Eileen Warnos. But until then, and it also goes up to, I think it came out after her execution. So at that point, it would have been 1997. I don't know that I knew that much about the life of Eileen Warnos until I had seen those documentaries. So when I saw that this documentary was coming out, actually several people texted me because they know of my interest in Eileen Warnos, and they said, I actually even have a video on my phone that's a caption of her saying that she's going to be in a spaceship and she's going to come back and all this kind of stuff that I send to people. When I saw that this documentary is coming out, and a lot of people sent it to me and said, like, oh my God, are you so excited? I'll be honest with you, I really wasn't that excited about it. Because I feel like today, So many documentaries. Like I said this a lot with the JonBenet Ramsey case. The JonBenet Ramsey case is also another case that I've been greatly interested in through the years. And I think part of that is that at the time the JonBenet Ramsey case happened, I had actually been watching a lot of documentaries, not just true crime documentaries, but documentaries about pageants. I was just talking about this on my vlog channel the other day. There was a documentary that came out called Living Dolls. There was another documentary on I think that one was on HBO. There was like a 6-part documentary that came out about pageants, little kids pageant systems. Pageants, little girl pageants were highly scrutinized at that time that JonBenet Ramsey was murdered. So I think that was kind of my interest in the whole JonBenet Ramsey thing. Plus, I've always been interested in pageants. So I think that was part of the JonBenet Ramsey thing. When I saw the JonBenet Ramsey documentary that came out, I think it was last year or earlier this year, in my reaction to that, what I said was, I don't think we need to put another JonBenet Ramsey documentary out. I mean, I know that the whole idea of that was to kind of clear her dad's name, but I don't think that we need to put another JonBenet Ramsey documentary out unless they're going to come out and say, this is who did it, we've arrested them, and this is the evidence. Like, I think at this point, it's like sometimes these documentaries themselves are overkill. And it's like, I don't know that there's anything that needs to be said. Why can we just not leave it how it is? Like, why do we need to continue to bring this up and bring this up and bring this up? So when I saw this documentary was coming out and I saw that it was like an hour and 55 minutes, honestly, I thought to myself, what are they going to say in an hour and 55 minutes that I haven't seen in the movie Monster with Charlize Theron, that I didn't see in Overkill with Jean Smart, the made-for-TV movie? That's on YouTube, and it's horrible. But I love Jean Smart nonetheless. That I've read in the 3 to 5 books that I read of hers. And Dear Dawn, her best friend, her letters from prison. I was like, what am I going to find out about Eileen Warnos? So I went into it, to be honest with you, very, very reluctantly. And I was like going to start like 20 minutes of it, and I was going to get back to my show, Shetland. I was like, I think I'm going to get 20 minutes into this. It's just going to be a retelling of what happened to Eileen Warnos, and I'm going to be kind of out. I'm going to be like, I don't even know that I can finish this. But that was not what I found. That was not what I found at all. And in fact, because I didn't know if I was going to turn around and make this video today, I wanted to write down some notes of how I really, truly felt like right after I got done with it. So these are my thoughts immediately finishing the documentary. And the documentary is airing on Netflix. It just came out, like I said, today. And it's called Eileen, the Queen of the Serial Killers. And what I wrote is, what this documentary does so beautifully and so brilliantly is what I have tried to put into words for years about Eileen Warnos. Without glamorizing Eileen or dehumanizing her victims in any way, the documentary briefly explains what conditions led to her choices and how she was systematically wronged time and time again. Sadly, I'm not sure that much has changed in our world, and that sex workers and assault victims are still viewed much the same way today by many in the justice system. And that's what I had written like immediately after I got done with it. It's a completely different documentary. When you watch The Selling of a Serial Killer, which I believe is the first documentary that came out about Eileen Warnos, and then you watch, and she's even been like highlighted, like she was in, Ryan Murphy's American Horror Story, The Hotel. She was in that one, I think. And she's been referenced in a lot of TV shows and stuff like that. When you watch The Selling of a Serial Killer, what it's really about, that first one, if I remember correctly, it's about her court cases. And it's about the police corruption that went behind, before she was even convicted, of them selling the rights of her story from their point of view to movie production companies, which was a huge deal, okay? Which was a huge deal. And then it goes into a little bit of how she obtains her lawyer at the time, who was nuts and he was crazy, but she believed in him. And that she got the attorney through this Arlene that ended up adopting her because she wanted her to turn life over to Christ. The second one goes into, if I remember correctly, a little bit more about her relationship with Arlene and then her being done with Arlene. This documentary doesn't get into the distancing with Arlene, which kind of surprised me a little bit. It was the only thing that, I mean, it's an hour and 55 minutes, but it feels very, very brief. It was the only piece that I was like, I wish they would have kind of got into that a little bit. Because Arlene is heavily interviewed in this documentary. And so then that one goes into her childhood. It shows her coming from, I believe, like Michigan, and that she was sleeping in this tent. It actually interviews this friend of hers, this homeless man that lived with her in these tents in the woods, because she wasn't allowed to live at her home. And it shows that, like, how Eileen Warnos was treated as a young child. In a documentary, it's interesting because through the years, pieces of Eileen's story have changed. The pieces that have changed are about her childhood. When you watch the parts that are consistent, that have never changed or never wavered, that's where you know, like, that Eileen is telling the truth, is when the stories don't waver. And she's even said that in her book, Dear Dawn, is that the things that she wavers with are the things that she doesn't want to come to terms with, which is why she'll tell things differently about her childhood. She'll one day say, I had a great childhood, and the next second she's saying that she was assaulted by a group of people that she went to high school with. And so it goes back and forth. The second part of the original documentary that I watch goes into her history a lot, her family history. And in fact, her mother, her biological mother, is interviewed in the documentary. And it goes in there and it also talks about, because when I got into this documentary, I thought at the beginning of it, it shows it all from this Dateline, which actually, I will say this, the Dateline interview that is shown highly in this, I have never seen that. I've never seen the documentary. They show the behind the scenes. They show the interview with the prosecutor, which he was an ass and did Eileen completely wrong. And I'm not defending, like I said, I'm not defending her rights, but they even show the judge that was taken off the case because the judge would have wanted to look into the mental health of Eileen Warnos and things like that. Sadly, I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I think that the case would go a whole lot different today. I don't think it would matter what state she lived in. I think she, killed 7 men, and she was a sex worker, and I think she was poor, and she had mental health issues, and she wasn't evaluated appropriately, and I don't know that I think it would go a whole lot different today. It was interesting when I saw things that I kind of already knew but had forgotten, that like in the court case, the prosecutor that was running for another term and things like that, that he got the judge, it was very much the boys' club. Well, that was kind of what Eileen had fought against her whole life, was the boys' club. And the boys' club was working against her, which was the judge allowed admission of the other 6 murderers into the court case that had never been allowed before. Now, I don't know why some footage from the original documentary series by Nick Bloomfield and this documentary series, some of it was in it and some of it was not. And I don't know why that is. But some of the documentary that I love is when, like, she cusses out the judge, okay? Like, they show a little bit of it, but I think this documentary was really trying to show, it wasn't trying to show Eileen from a really harsh point of view, but she could switch on a dime. And to be honest with you, that's a little bit of what I loved about her personality, was that she tried so hard to be such a good person, but like as soon as like the rubber met the road and she got screwed over, it's like the true Eileen came out, and you could see that, and I think that's what was kind of relatable. Maybe that is the part that's relatable to me, is it's like, she's trying so hard in court and, smiling at people and everything. And then as soon as she's like starts cussing out the judge, and it's like, she's had it. She's had enough, They don't show a lot of that. So this documentary is about this artist, filmmaker named Jasmine, who lives in Australia, and she heard about Eileen's story and she started writing to Eileen, and they wrote back and forth for, I believe it was 8 years. And then Eileen said that she wanted to tell her story. And so Eileen always had this idea that people were going to make millions of dollars off of her story. Well, they did. I mean, Charlize Theron did, and Monster won Academy Awards. And so eventually her story got told. I love that movie. I don't know that I think I think the portrayal of Tyria Moore is always very, very interesting. I had watched the documentaries long before I saw Christina Ricci in that movie. I'm like, I don't know. I would love Christina Ricci to play me in a movie. I don't know. Like, I thought it was like interesting. It's a stretch. And I will tell you that I've always felt that the truth behind Eileen's story is that she loved Ty so much that, like, when you listen to confession tapes, I've listened to them so many times at this point. When you listen to the confession tapes of Eileen is somebody that had been abandoned over and over again, never had unconditional love, never had true love, was abandoned by her mother at birth, given to her grandparents if there was alleged abuse, was abandoned by all of her friends, was living in the woods, was abandoned by her brother and her sister so that they could live in the house and she lived in the woods, was abandoned by exes over and over and over again, abandoned by men, abandoned by women. She was abandoned her entire life. She then finds Ty, and she falls in love with Ty, and then Ty gets her on the phone and betrays her. She doesn't know, and says, you've got to confess, or if you don't, I'm afraid I'm going to go to prison. When you listen to confession tapes, okay, it's not Ty saying to Eileen, just be honest and say what you did. The confession tapes are, if you don't confess, I'm going to prison, okay? And something's going to happen to me and my family. Eileen says, I'm not going to let that happen to you. She doesn't ever say in the confession tapes. If you listen to them, I've listened to them enough, okay? She doesn't say, she starts saying then, you didn't do anything, blah, blah, blah. Because I think that Eileen at that point has figured out this is being taped. She's kind of alluded to that in interviews later, that she kind of knew that something was going on because of how Ty was being on the phone. But on the stand on that day, no, she felt such betrayal. I've always felt that Tyria Moore had something to do with these cases. Maybe not all of them, but at least one or two of them, especially because they found her driving around in this dead man's car. She was in the car too. I mean, when they were looking for Eileen, they were looking for Eileen and Ty. I've always felt that Ty had something to do with these cases. A lot of these cases are like, how did Eileen move these men, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And so anyway, the story is about this filmmaker and this artist and her relationship with Eileen. And then Eileen invites her to come over and interview her because she wants to tell her story. And then she ends up coming for her execution later. Eileen does not invite her inside to the execution, but she stands outside and she's with Eileen's best friend, Dawn. Dawn is who wrote Dear Dawn or published this book, which is Eileen and Dawn's letters back and forth with Eileen in prison. I haven't read all of it, but I've read a lot of it, and it's very, very interesting. And you get to see a more humane side of Eileen that I think that shows up in a lot of these things. I think it's interesting when you look at Eileen Warnos as a sociological study of like, how does somebody get to where they're at? I thought the documentary did such a fantastic job because like at one point, like a lot of the other documentaries, they don't show this. The Dateline interview that is woven through this, okay? It shows things like the first man, okay? And a lot of people have insinuated or believed that the first man that assaulted Eileen was what set off the trauma in her head that she had had for years and years and years, okay? Well, the prosecutor never looked into the history of this man. Dateline, it took them one day to look up the history of this man. And they found out that he had served prison time for previous attempted assault, okay, on a woman. And when they looked that up, I'm not saying the word on YouTube because YouTube doesn't like that word. When they looked it up at that time, the mental evaluation was that if he got out, he would do it to somebody else again. And he said, put me to death because I will do this to somebody else. I will hurt somebody else. That's what the man said in his own words that she ended up killing. Well, people believe that that set it off. The prosecutor stood behind his words and he said, she got a fair trial. And the Dateline interviewer said, you never even introduced this into evidence. It's in your files. They literally, I mean, if this were anything else, he hid information. He hid information that was right there that could have been an appeal or gotten Eileen Warnos. I mean, that alone, and then the introduction. I mean, this trial today, this would be major news, okay? That the judge allowed at the Good Boys Club for the admission of 6 other murders to come in to the trial of one murder, which was not allowed. And then also that he hid information about the sentencing of the victim because they're saying that Eileen was never assaulted by this man. And there's evidence that he has prior convictions of that. And the interviewer even looks at him and she says, are you aware that he had any prior convictions? No, he's a prosecutor. He put her to death. No, we looked into it and he had no prior convictions. And she goes, well, here it is. And it took us a day to find it. I mean, it's baffling to me. There were things in this documentary that they had never shown before. This documentary humanized not just Eileen, but the case around her. And the fact that this happens to so many women in our society. Now, yes, okay? I mean, the reason why the made-for-TV movie was called Overkill was because it started with one murder where possibly she was defending herself. And then it goes into, 6 or 7 total murders. Later, Eileen says, when she does her interview with the filmmaker, and I had never seen her say this before, she said that what started, okay, with defending herself. And I believe that maybe the first 2 were self-defense. I believe that. What she said was that she knew she was going down, and if she was going to take some real bad people with her, okay? Well, I don't know that I necessarily think that that's okay. But from her point of view, her state of mind at that time that was never evaluated, it makes some kind of sense. I'm not saying I condone it. I don't think it's okay. But it makes sense from her mental point of view of where she was at that time. In a way that we've never, I mean, from a sociological point of view, the fact that Eileen Warnos isn't studied more and understood more of what could happen. We have this whole conversation about, is somebody born this way or are they taught this way? Is it learned behavior? Or is it born behavior? Things like that. And I think Eileen Warnos is a perfect example of maybe somebody that had a lot of mental health issues, but was also abandoned, unloved, neglected, abused, and mistreated. And those combined ended up turning somebody into a serial killer that she did define herself by at the end of her life that they talk about in the documentary. I think that that needs to be discussed. I think when you talk about somebody like Eileen Warnos, and I couldn't really, in words, put together, like I would say in, videos or talking to people, I'd be like, I feel like society screwed Eileen Warnos over. And people look at me like I was crazy. And I couldn't really explain why. And I think that this documentary did such a fantastic job of it. It did such a fantastic job because what it did was it didn't excuse her behavior. It didn't condone her behavior. It didn't dehumanize the victims. It didn't take away their stories whatsoever. It did a better job of explaining the conditions that led her to the choices that she made. But it didn't condone those choices. It didn't say that those were okay. And her and Dawn, the filmmaker, and Dawn, her best friend at the end, Dawn says, this is how the whole documentary ends. She says, at the end, she looked at me and she said, I am a serial killer. She finally owned it. And Dawn says, I've never heard her say that before. I think that alone, is interesting. So for me, watching this documentary, as somebody that has watched and read everything about Eileen Warnos, it was fantastically done. It was really, really interesting. I will say this, if you do not know the background history of Eileen Warnos, you haven't watched the other two documentaries, I would highly suggest watching Selling of a Serial Killer, The Life and Death of a Serial Killer, and then watching this. This seems like the third part to that is what it feels like. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I even caught it because I know so much about this case and Eileen Warnos that I don't even know that I realized that until I was done with it. But I also kind of wonder if that's not a hindrance to the filmmaker, because the filmmaker also and Jasmine also knows so much about Eileen Warnos that when you're watching it, if you know that much about Eileen Warnos, then you're not looking for what's missing as much, right? I mean, there was a few moments where I was like Arlene, who is the mother that adopts her. In the previous documentaries, they talk about how Eileen comes out and she doesn't want anything to do with her anymore because she feels like she lied to her and she was just trying to get her money. She is heavily interviewed through this whole thing, and you feel bad for Arlene. That was one of the differences that I didn't necessarily love about this documentary. But we don't know Arlene, the adoptive mother's true story today. But it shows how bizarre it is in the first two documentaries. But I think because they're so close to the story, they didn't realize maybe some of what they were leaving out of the story, which is why I would definitely recommend, and they're fantastic documentaries anyway, they're beyond bizarre. I mean, just to see some of the scenes of the attorney smoking weed, driving down the interstate in Ocala, Florida, listening to classic metal rock and playing guitar in his office. I mean, those scenes alone to show how wackadoodle the attorney is, the Steve guy. I mean, the documentaries are fantastic for that alone. Plus, you really get to see the paranoia of Eileen towards the end of her life. And I think that's important to see. So anyway, I thought it was really, really well done. I would recommend it to anybody. Let me know if you've watched it and what you thought in the comment section below. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.